Thank you, Udo. Without further delay, I will now give the floor to our two guest speakers. We will start with Dr. Sarah Vaughan. Her intervention will set the scene of the political situation and the challenges faced by Ethiopia. So, Ms. Vaughan, you are connected, I think, digitally or remote, as we say. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. My name is Sarah Vaughan, and I am an independent researcher, and these remarks reflect my own views. They're not made on behalf of any other institution. I've been asked to give you a brief overview. I will make 6 points, starting at the macro level and concluding with the more specific. Firstly, geopolitics. I see weakness and dependency. In my view, Ethiopia's sovereign decision-making power is weaker than at any time since the Derg regime, when the military government was strongly dependent on the patronage of the Soviet Union. The Horn region is more violent and more volatile than at any time since the 1980s, and the influence of foreign powers, particularly but not only the Gulf states, is stronger. This has exacerbated violence of civil wars in both Ethiopia and Sudan, and the toll on civilians. The Ethiopian Prime Minister's striking new saber rattling in relation to the country's need for access to the sea, inverted commas, last year directed towards Eritrea and this year arising from Ethiopia's controversial MOU with Somaliland, has contributed to destabilizing the region. In the last 6 months, Ethiopia has increasingly antagonized its neighbors with little evidence of gain of its national interest. Secondly, the economic picture, which is also one of dependency, here just about averting collapse. Ethiopia's revenues from taxes and exports continue to decline, with the latter artificially boosted by the export of minerals. Mining is increasingly important, and it comes with high levels of conflict risk. Proposed economic reforms, including devaluation, will, in my view, do little to address the deep dysfunctionality of the Ethiopian economy under current policy, but it will exacerbate the erosion of service delivery. The scope for leverage on the part of the IFIs or European partners should be carefully considered in a context of high levels of largesse, particularly from the Gulf states, but also including Chinese debt rescheduling. Thirdly, the domestic political level. Ongoing concentration and personalization of power in the person of the Prime Minister, who again shuffled his cabinet this week. This is an increasingly regular pattern, and on this occasion demonstrated just how far the pool of loyal political loyalists on which he's able to draw has shrunk, particularly amongst Tigrayan and Amhara politicians. Over the last 6 months, prominent Oromos and Amharas have withdrawn from the ruling Prosperity Party, and along with key opposition figures, many are now based outside the country or jailed. Fourthly, the erosion of state delivery capacity. One of the most important and least talked about effects of the last decade of underfunding and political centralization has been the disintegration of local state delivery capacity in health, education, agriculture, or relief. One of Africa's most effective developmental states is now subject to widespread inertia, corruption, or collapse at the micro level. Many of the data sets key to performance evaluation have been discontinued or eroded. Fifthly, I agree with the pessimism already expressed in the introductory remarks. Unresolved domestic conflict continues in at least 3 important regions to drain the resources of the country and boost human rights abuses. In Amhara, a popularly supported but fragmented insurgency has seen the army deployed since August last year in an increasingly bloody campaign. As has been noted, a 6-month state of emergency was recently renewed, and on the 29th of January, between 50 and 80 individuals are believed to have been killed at a town near the regional capital. Unconfirmed reports indicate execution-style killings by the army going door to door. This is not a war which can be won militarily, and it is unlikely that it will be resolved by negotiation in the near future. Secondly, in Oromia, the 5-year insurgency of the Oromo Liberation Army in the west came close to a negotiated settlement in November last year, after weeks of work between the OLA and the military, before failing at the last minute. Fighting continues. In both of these regions, the government has closed the internet and journalists have been precluded from travel and arrested. In Tigray, although the cessation of hostilities agreement has held since November 2022 with no fighting between the signatories, key tenets have not been implemented, notably the return of nearly 1 million IDPs to Western Tigray. Frustrations between Tigrayan and federal authorities are escalating, with many Tigrayans seeing an ongoing federal prosecution of war by other means over the last year. Finally, the return of starvation and famine. The failure of the 2023 harvest is precipitating widespread starvation in eastern Tigray, northern Amhara and Afar, at a time when international funding for humanitarian activities is low. In Tigray, last year's harvest saw only 37% of the production of a normal year. This comes on top of 3 years during which the war eroded the resources of the rural majority, caused by looting and destruction, by the withholding of salaries, by the closure of alternative livelihoods options, trade, migration, credit, small enterprises, and by the halting of safety net transfers, which supported 1 million Tigrayans before the war and which have not since resumed at this scale. The suspension of food aid between March and November last year because of a national scandal of misappropriation was the final straw for many peasant farmers. In my estimation, many thousands have already died. The resumption of aid is welcome, but it will need to be massively scaled up if many tens of thousands more are to avoid the same fate. Allow me to conclude, Mr. Chairman, by commenting that since my first visit to rural Tigray in 1988, exactly 35 years ago at the end of the Derg period, I have never seen the rural economy in northern Ethiopia in such a desperate state as I did in November and December last year. Thank you.